Hello and welcome to this episode of Epochs, where I'm going to be talking all about the life and times and adventures of Captain James Cook, and I am joined by Luca Johnson. Luca, how are you?
Hello, good morning, yes.
Good to have you back.
Glad to be back, so glad to be back and talking about Cook.
Yeah, so it's a fantastic life, isn't it?
Yeah, it's extraordinary.
Really, really filled with adventure. I mean, I say that about lots of people, but this one sort of really is chock-a-block.
And I think the thing that's most extraordinary about Cook's life and the scope of the adventure that he had is just the humble beginnings from which it started.
Right.
Because he's one of those people that if you'd have just looked at the circumstances into which he was born in, you'd never have guessed that he could go on to lead just such an extraordinary life.
Yeah, that is one of the first things to say about him. He wasn't sort of destined to be a captain, or, as you say, in the 18th century, because his whole life is in the 18th century, isn't it? You would have to be of a certain station in the world,
yes.
Right? But
a gentleman.
To dream of being an officer and a captain. And he wasn't really, was he?
No, not at all. So his father had actually come down from Scotland, sort of in the wake of the Jacobite rebellions of the early 1700s, to sort of look for better work prospects, and had settled up in North Yorkshire, where he'd met James's mother, Grace, and they got married, and James Cook, named after his father, was the second son, and he was born into a little village called Marton, which even now it's just sort of, nowadays it's sort of just south of Middlesbrough, and it's got about a few thousand people there even now, so it's not the most assuming place in the world, but ostensibly, it seems like he had a very good childhood. Like, he had a good, strong family. Right. But when he was 6, his father moved a little further to the south to a place called Great Ayton, where he worked as a farmhand on the farm of a man called Sir Thomas Scotto. And eventually, even within his youngest years, it was very, I think, Cook was one of those, you know, when you just get those naturally really well-behaved kids who just, you can't help but like them. They're just sort of a young little sweetheart in a way. It was very much like that, to the point that Scotto, the owner of the farm, paid for him to go to school and to have sort of just a rudimentary education, which even back then was a leg up in and of itself from such low beginnings.
It's something to remember. We take it for granted in our world that everyone gets an education. It's weird, or in fact it's a problem. You're not allowed to go to school, right?
Yeah.
Social services will come round saying, why haven't you sent your child to school? You know, back in the 18th century, if you were poor, you don't get any schooling.
No.
Or if your mum and dad are perhaps not literate, they don't take it upon themselves to teach you how to read and write, or teach you numbers or anything, or teach you how to swim or anything. You probably might not get any instruction on anything. So, to be paid for to go to school and get your letters, make a real difference. Because, you know, without that, he certainly could never have been an officer or anything like that.
No, not at all. But his dad did very well out of it as well. His dad quickly went on to become chief farmhand because his dad had a very good work ethic. So it's very clear to see where the younger James got his from. But his dad, again, sort of always knew that he wanted more for his son than just working on a farm for his life. So he eventually managed to, when James got to about the age of 15, 16, I believe it was, his dad had it arranged for him that he would go to the nearby seaside town on the Yorkshire coastline of Staithes, where he would get an apprenticeship working as a shopkeeper with a man called William Sanderson. And so with nothing really more than a spare change of clothes and the bare essentials, Cook walked for 2 days on foot from Great Ayton to Staithes. To this little seaside town where he set up as an apprentice shopkeeper.
It's another thing, isn't it, in the pre-modern world that I think people forget about. You've got to walk most places. I mean, it's obvious when you say it. There's no motor vehicles, but you also think, you probably get a horse or a wagon somewhere. No, most people, if you had no money, you walked.
Definitely.
If you want to go on pilgrimage to Compostela or Rome or Jerusalem, you're probably going to walk there.
Yeah. You have good carbs by the end of it.
Right, yeah. You're going to walk across Europe if that's the sort of thing you want to do. Yeah, so if you're going to go to the coast, you walk there. You walk there. Going on the coast, that was sort of, again, perhaps a turning point. Well, certainly would have been a turning point.
In many ways, yes. But what's remarkable as well, so the shop was a double shop. It was a drapery and a baker's. And so Cook was left in charge of running the shop. Obviously, most of the profits went to William Sanderson, but back in those days, if you were an apprentice to someone, it was also just customary and seen as the decent thing to do that you give them, your apprentice, somewhere to stay, you give them lodgings. Yeah. But it wasn't the most, affluent place. And so James literally spent a few years sleeping. His bed was under the shop counter, just sleeping under the counter, and the family had their space, and he'd be in charge of, taking stock and dealing with the customers and shutting down, opening up, all the sort of things that you think of as being a part of, shopping today. But what's very clear is that even from that age as well, that the people who went in the shop very much liked him. It was a very courteous young gentleman, young teenager. And it also, being on that coastline, also gave him the chance when he was off work to go and hang around at the inn or the tavern and mingle with the local sailors and the local fishermen. And it was that sort of led him to just sort of go around the bay every now and then with them on aboard their ships or their boats. So it's at that time that he probably got a bit of a flavour for the seafaring life and the aspiration to go do that.
Again, another thing to say in the 18th century, of course, the whole world of the Navy, merchant or Royal Navy, the whole idea of going to sea is extremely different. Nowadays, it would be weird if someone, or not weird, it's just not very common that someone dreams of going to sea or wanting to be on board ship. Like, one person in 10,000 like got dreams of working on a cruise line or something, or their father is a fisherman and so they're sort of destined to be a fisherman or something. The vast majority of people, it just doesn't cross your mind.
Never occurred to me.
But in the 18th century, it's just a massive thing. It's just a whole vocation that is possible for someone.
Yeah.
Right. It's a whole world of something that's appealing, especially to young men. Right.
Right.
Because also, we must say, it's very dangerous now. If you want to be a fisherman or work on a cruise ship, you don't expect to die at sea, do you?
No, not likely.
So it's just the whole concept, the whole part of the world that is involved in navies and seafaring is just very, very different in the 18th century, right?
Yeah, for sure. But really, the thing that sort of ends Cook's brief stint as a shopkeeper is one day and it's remarkable that we have this chronicled, but from letters and various resources and documents, we actually have a very vivid picture of his life, so we can get into those little details. But someone came into the shop one day and paid for something using an old South Sea shilling, which was obviously not, as sort of native. It had come from the South Seas, obviously. And Cook was quite enamoured with this coin, and so he took it out of the till and swapped it for another one so he could keep it himself. But Sanderson sort of noticed that it was missing and accused him of stealing it. And despite Cook's protestations, it really soured the working relationship between them. And so Cook asked to be, let go from his apprenticeship and for other arrangements to be made.
Right. And so there's that when he moves on to
Whitby.
Right.
Yeah. So this is where Cook spends a huge chunk of his life. He spends about the next 7 years, from the ages of about 17 to about 25, all in Whitby. Now, Whitby is, even now, a really, really beautiful place. It's a place that when you go into the old town, coming down from the north, as Cook would have done, walking from Staithes and going across the bridge, you go into the old town, and the old town there is a really, really beautiful place. And in fact, I was there only this Monday, just gone, doing some last-minute research and stuff. But there's, just to give people a flavour of it, there's like pie and mash shops in this old town, and they have a banner across the back of it that says, "We've been open through the reign of King Charles I, King Charles II, and now King Charles III." So that's how proudly they wear their heritage and the longevity of their history. But within Whitby now as well is the Captain Cook Museum. And the museum itself is the exact house that Cook lived in.
Right, I've never been there.
Yeah, you should. It's actually really well presented and a really nice visit. But this was the house of John Walker. And John Walker was he owned a whole sort of slew of merchant ships, sort of that operated the coal trade along the North Sea and down to London. And what's interesting to note about John Walker was he and his family, they were all Quakers.
Right.
Which meant that when you went into his house, as it's sort of been redone to look like today, it's not the same walls, but it's been redone to look like it. Cook would have lived in a very simplistic environment because of their Quaker beliefs. There would have been no portraits on the wall. The furniture would have not been just whatever the latest fashion trend was. It would have been a very simplistic way of living, but with a very strong, Protestant work ethic on steroids in many ways. And Cook thrived on it.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.